The world swam back into focus with the grating sound of gravel against her cheek. A sharp, metallic taste filled Sarah's mouth, and a throbbing pulse began its angry rhythm behind her right eye. One moment, she had been fueled by a righteous fire, her voice raw from shouting. The next, the blue Oregon sky had wheeled violently and slammed into the unforgiving pavement. Now, there was only the lingering scent of exhaust fumes and the sight of a luxury SUV's taillights shrinking in the distance. A few feet away, an old man was struggling to sit up, his face a mask of bewildered shame. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The voice belonged to a diner regular, a kind-faced truck driver named Al. He was kneeling beside her, his large hands hovering uncertainly. They just drove off," Sarah murmured, the words feeling thick and clumsy. She pushed herself up, her palms stinging as they scraped against the asphalt. Her head spun in a dizzying circle. "Someone got the plate!" another voice called out. Brenda, the diner's daytime manager, was standing on the sidewalk, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, an assault. Outside the Pleasant Valley Diner on Main Street." Sarah's gaze found the man she had tried to defend. "Popstar, are you hurt?" Elias Pops Vance, the quiet, homeless veteran who was as much a part of the diner's scenery as its faded checkered floors, slowly got to his feet. He brushed dust from his worn trousers, his movements stiff. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Shouldn't have," he mumbled, his voice raspy with disuse and something that sounded like regret. "You shouldn't have gotten involved, Sarah." Before she could answer, the wail of a siren sliced through the afternoon calm. A single police cruiser pulled up to the curb, and a man whose posture radiated a profound sense of inconvenience stepped out. Officer Miller. He surveyed the scene, the small crowd of onlookers, Brenda on the phone, Sarah dazed and bleeding, and Pops, whom he dismissed with a cursory, disdainful glance. "All right, what's the fuss?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was dealing with a fender bender, not a violent assault. This was the moment Sarah's world began to unravel. This was the moment she learned that doing the right thing was the beginning of the story, not the end. It had started as a Tuesday like any other. The 5:30 a.m. alarm was a cruel necessity, a digital shriek that clawed Sarah from the depths of an exhausted sleep. Her small apartment, with its perpetually dripping faucet and view of a brick wall, felt more like a holding cell than a home. It was a constant, physical reminder of her precarious financial state, a life lived one paycheck to the next, with rent always looming like a storm cloud. The bus ride to the Pleasant Valley Diner was her quiet time, a 30-minute buffer between the solitude of her apartment and the forced cheerfulness of customer service. She'd watched the small town of Havenwood wake up, the storefronts of Main Street glowing in the early morning light. It was a picturesque place, the kind of town that graced postcards, but for Sarah, its charm was a constant, mocking reminder of the life she felt locked out of. The diner itself was a relic, a capsule of a bygone era. The vinyl on the booths was cracked, the chrome on the milkshake machines was pitted, but it had a genuine warmth that Sarah clung to. It was there she found a semblance of community, a cast of regulars who knew her name and tipped what they could. And every morning, without fail, her first act upon arriving was for Pops. Elias Vance was a fixture on the wooden bench outside the diner's front window. He was a ghost of a man, with eyes that held the far-off, haunted look of someone who had seen too much. His limp was pronounced, a permanent souvenir from a war fought half a century ago in the jungles of Vietnam. He never spoke much, content to watch the world go by. The other townsfolk mostly ignored him, another piece of unfortunate scenery to be sidestepped. But Sarah saw him. She saw the quiet dignity in the way he kept his worn clothes as clean as possible, the way he never asked for a handout. Their ritual was unspoken but sacred. Every morning she'd bring him a fresh cup of coffee and a day-old pastry from the kitchen. "Morning, Pops," she'd say, placing the items on the bench beside him. "Morning, Sarah," he'd reply, his voice a low rumble. And that was it. A small, simple act of kindness that anchored her day. She once noticed him absently polishing a small, tarnished silver charm that hung from a leather cord around his neck. It looked like the emblem of a motorcycle, an eagle with its wings spread wide. It seemed so out of place on this quiet, unassuming man. She made a mental note to ask him about it one day, but the rush of the breakfast crowd always intervened. That Tuesday, the bell above the diner door had chimed around noon, announcing an arrival that shifted the very atmosphere of the room. 3 young men dressed in expensive, self-consciously casual clothing swaggered in. They were loud, their voices carrying an entitled boom that grated on the quiet hum of the diner. Chad, Kyle, and Brad. They didn't need to introduce themselves. Their entire demeanor screamed their names. They complained about the lack of Wi-Fi, made a show of wrinkling their noses at the menu, and treated Sarah with a particular brand of condescending flirtation that made her skin crawl. "Do you even have oat milk?" Chad had asked, as if the concept was a foreign import he was bestowing upon this backwater town. Sarah had plastered on her professional smile. "I'm afraid not. We have whole 2% and skim." They'd laughed, a short, sharp bark that was more about asserting dominance than expressing humor. "How quaint," Brad had sneered. She endured their meal, refilling their drinks with forced pleasantries, while their conversation, a smug tapestry of tech jargon and complaints about their trust funds, echoed through the diner. When they finally paid, leaving a crumpled $5 bill on a $90 check, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. But they weren't finished. Through the large front window, Sarah watched them exit. They paused by the bench where Pops was sitting, enjoying the midday sun. The scene unfolded like a slow-motion horror film. She saw their lips move, their faces contorted in mocking sneers. Then Chad, with a theatrical gesture of carelessness, upended his half-full latte onto Pop's lap. The hot liquid soaked into the old man's trousers. Pops flinched and rose slowly, a look of confusion and hurt on his face. That was when Kyle shoved him, hard. The old man, off balance, his bad leg giving way, stumbled backward and fell to the pavement with a sickening thud. Something inside Sarah snapped. It was a dam breaking, releasing a flood of all her pent-up frustration, her exhaustion, her quiet rage at the small and large injustices of the world. Before she even realized what she was doing, she had thrown the diner door open and was storming towards them. "Hey, leave him alone!" she screamed, her voice shaking with adrenaline. The trio turned, their expressions shifting from cruel amusement to annoyed surprise. "What's it to you, sweetheart?" Chad smirked, taking a step towards her. "This old bum bothering you?" "He wasn't bothering anyone. You assaulted him." She knelt beside Pops, trying to help him up. "That's a big word," Chad said, his voice laced with menace. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "You should learn to mind your own business." Instinct took over. She wrenched her arm free and shoved him back. "Get away from him!" The smirk vanished from Chad's face, replaced by a flash of genuine anger. He didn't hesitate. His hand came up and he backhanded her across the face. The world exploded in a starburst of pain, the sky, the diner. The faces of the men all blurred into a sickening swirl as she fell, her head connecting with the pavement with a dull, echoing crack. The last thing she heard before the world went gray was their laughter as they climbed into their gleaming SUV and sped away. Officer Miller's notepad remained stubbornly blank. "So let me get this straight," he said, his pen tapping a rhythmic, irritating beat against the paper. "You saw these men who you'd already had a negative interaction with, and you chose to leave your place of employment to confront them." Sarah stared at him, bewildered. The throbbing in her head was now a full-blown drum solo. "They pushed down an elderly man, a veteran. I didn't choose to confront them. She trailed off, realizing how he was framing it. "You instigated," he finished for her, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. He glanced at Pops, who was now sitting silently on the bench, his head bowed. "And your witness here doesn't seem to have much to say." "He's in shock," Sarah insisted, her voice rising. "And I'm the victim here. I was assaulted." "Look," Miller said, sighing, as if explaining a complex mathematical theorem to a child. "We've got a he said, she said situation. You have a scrape on your face. They'll say you attacked Badiabimba them, that they were defending themselves. These guys," he gestured vaguely down the road, "are from out of town. Big money. Bringing a charge against visitors with it's not good for Havenwood's image. It gets complicated." The injustice of it was a physical thing, a ball of hot lead forming in her stomach. Complicated? A man filmed it on his phone. Miller's eyes flickered with annoyance. And when that video surfaces, it'll show you yelling and shoving one of them first. Trust me, I've seen this 100 times. My advice? Go home, put some ice on that. It'll be better for everyone if you just let this go. He scribbled a case number on a slip of paper and handed it to her. It felt like a receipt for a transaction in which she had been sold out. He gave a curt nod, climbed back into his cruiser, and drove away, leaving a void where justice was supposed to be. Brenda, her face etched with concern, insisted on driving Sarah to the emergency room. You need to get checked out, honey, and you need a paper trail. That cop was useless. The ER was a sterile, brightly lit purgatory of beeping machines and quiet suffering. After an hour-long wait, Sarah was finally seen by a Dr. Evans, a man with a crisp white coat and an air of detached superiority. He listened to her account of the attack with a look of profound skepticism. "And had you consumed any alcohol today, Ms. Jenkins?" he asked, his eyes scanning her chart. "No, I was at work. It was the middle of the day." "Any recreational drug use?" "What?" "No." He shined a penlight in her eyes, his touch impersonal and rough. He prodded the burgeoning bruise on her cheek with a cold finger. "Well, there's some minor swelling, a contusion, but I don't see any signs of a serious concussion." His tone implied he had been hoping not to find one, as it would disrupt his schedule. He ordered a toxicology screen anyway, a standard procedure that felt like an accusation. When it came back clean, he didn't apologize for his suspicion. He simply handed her a discharge form and a leaflet on managing minor headaches. "Avoid strenuous activity and altercations," he said, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. "Take some Tylenol for the pain. You'll be fine." She walked out of the hospital, clutching a bill for $700, her head throbbing not just from the blow, but from the sheer, humiliating weight of being disbelieved, dismissed, and discarded by the very systems designed to protect and heal. The physical pain was nothing compared to the sting of being treated like a nuisance. She found Pop still on his bench outside the now darkened diner. He looked smaller, more fragile than ever before. The last rays of sunset cast long shadows, making the lines on his face seem deeper. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is my fault." "No, it isn't," she said, sitting down beside him, ignoring the ache in her body. "It's their fault. And the cop, and the doctor. It's everyone's fault but yours." They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, to break the heavy quiet, she asked the question she had long been curious about. "Pops, what's the story with your necklace?" He looked down at the silver eagle charm, his thumb rubbing its worn surface. For the first time, he opened a small door to his past. "Iron Saviors," he said, the name spoken with a mixture of pride and pain. "Motorcycle club? My family, for a long time." He told her about coming back from Vietnam, a broken young man adrift in a country that didn't want him. The club had given him a purpose, a brotherhood. He was Elias Pops Vance then because he was always looking out for the younger members. But a tragedy, a shadow from the war that had followed him home, led to a falling out. He couldn't live with the ghosts and the roar of the engines anymore. He'd walked away from it all decades ago, eventually losing touch with everyone, including a daughter he hadn't seen since she was a teenager. "The man who runs it now," Pop said, his voice thick with memory. "Marcus Thorne. They call him Preacher. He was just a kid when I found him. Took him under my wing." He shook his head slowly. "They'd be ashamed to see me like this." He seemed to wrestle with a thought before reaching a decision. "Do you have a piece of paper? A pen?" Sarah fished a crumpled napkin and a pen from her apron pocket. Pops painstakingly wrote down a name and a phone number. Marcus Preacher Thorne. "You hold on to this," he said, pressing the napkin into her hand. "Just in case." He couldn't bring himself to make the call. The shame was too great a barrier. The next day was a cascade of failures. Sarah woke up to find her face had blossomed into a grotesque patchwork of purple and yellow. Worse, her phone was buzzing with notifications. The bystander's video had gone viral, but not in the way she'd hoped. It had been posted by one of Chad's friends, edited to start with the moment she shoves him, and captioned, "Psycho waitress in Hicksville, Oregon attacks tourists for no reason." The comment section was a cesspool of digital vitriol. She was a Karen, a crazy liberal, an entitled service worker. People defended the men, praising them for not taking her crap. Her character was being assassinated by strangers across the country. At 10 a.m., Brenda called, her voice thick with apology. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. Mayor Thompson called the owner. The town's business association. They're all worried about the bad press. They're letting you go." It wasn't a request. It was a termination. She was being punished for being a victim. Numbly, she walked back to her apartment. Taped to the door was the final blow, a bright pink eviction notice. She was already a month behind, and her landlord, a man with no patience for sob stories, had clearly heard the news. She had 3 days to vacate the premises. Sarah sank to the floor of her small, empty living room. Everything was gone. Her job, her home, her reputation. She had stood up for a helpless man, and in return, the world had methodically and efficiently dismantled her life. She was utterly and completely alone. Her fingers closed around the crumpled napkin in her pocket. She pulled it out, staring at the name. Preacher. It was a ridiculous, hopeless idea, a Hail Mary into the darkness. What could a biker she'd never met, hundreds of miles away, possibly do? But she had nothing left to lose. With trembling hands, she dialed the number. A man with a deep, calm voice answered on the second ring. "Yeah?" Is this Marcus Thorne?" Sarah asked, her own voice sounding small and foreign. "Who's asking?" "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a friend of Elias Vance, of Pops." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. Pops. Preacher's voice was different now. Tense, alert. "Elias is alive?" "Yes," she said, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "He is. But he's in trouble." And then it all came pouring out. She told him everything. The tech bros, the assault, the shove, the slap. She told him about Officer Miller's indifference, Dr. Evans' condescension about losing her job, about the eviction notice taped to her door. She told him how Pops was now too scared to even sit on his bench, how the shame was eating him alive. When she was finished, there was another silence. She had expected a polite dismissal, and I'm sorry to hear that. Instead, what she heard was the quiet, chilling promise of a gathering storm. "Where are you, Sarah?" Preacher asked, his voice now as hard and cold as steel. "Tell me the name of your town." "Havenwood," she whispered. "Havenwood, Oregon." "Don't you worry about a thing," he said, and the line went dead. Sarah sat on the floor for a long time, the silence of her apartment pressing in on her, unsure if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if she had finally, accidentally, lit a fuse. Hundreds of miles away, in a sprawling clubhouse that smelled of worn leather, stale beer, and motor oil, Marcus Preacher Thorne lowered his phone. The name, Elias Vance, had struck him like a physical blow. For 20 years he had assumed his mentor, the man who had pulled him from the wreckage of a misspent youth and given him a code to live by, was dead. To learn he was alive was a miracle. To learn he was homeless, beaten, and shamed was a sacrilege. He walked to the center of the clubhouse where a handful of iron saviors were playing pool and talking shop. He slammed a heavy hand on the side of a pinball machine, the resulting thwack and jangle cutting through the noise. "Pops is alive," he announced, his voice a low growl that commanded immediate attention. Every man in the room froze. "He's in a town called Havenwood, Oregon. Some rich punks put their hands on him, and on a woman who tried to defend him. The law did nothing. The town did nothing." He scanned the faces of his men, mechanics, lawyers, accountants, veterans, all brothers under the patch of the iron saviors. Their expressions hardened, a collective anger beginning to smolder. "Tank!" Preacher called out to his sergeant-at-arms. "Activate the tree. All chapters. The message is simple. Pops is alive. He's in trouble. We ride." The call rippled outward, from Oregon to California, Nevada to Washington. A phone tree, old school and reliable, spread the word. In a garage in Portland, a mechanic wiped his hands and told his customer the repair would have to wait. In a high-rise office in Seattle, a corporate lawyer canceled his afternoon depositions. In a quiet suburban home, a school teacher called in a sick day. One by one, they dropped everything. They pulled on their cuts, the leather vests bearing the silver eagle emblem that Pops himself had once worn. They straddled their machines, the polished chrome gleaming. And from 100 different points on the map, engines began to roar to life, a symphony of righteous thunder. They converged on the highways, forming small packs that grew into larger ones, all moving with a singular purpose, a river of steel and leather flowing towards a small, unsuspecting town in Oregon. The next morning, Sarah was moving in a fog of despair. The eviction notice on her door was a constant, screaming reminder of her failure. She was listlessly placing her few meager possessions into cardboard boxes when she first heard it. A low, distant rumble. She paused, thinking it was thunder from an approaching storm. But the sky outside her window was a clear, brilliant blue. The sound grew steadily, not like rolling thunder, but like a sustained, ground-shaking roar. It was a sound that vibrated up through the soles of her feet, that rattled the glass in her window pane. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. Her breath caught in her throat. One by one they came, a river of motorcycles flowing down her quiet residential street. Harley-Davidsons, Indians, custom choppers, dozens, then scores, then hundreds of them. They moved with a disciplined, almost military precision, filing in and parking along both sides of the road, their engines rumbling in a low, menacing unison before falling silent. The sudden quiet was more intimidating than the noise. Her street, her entire block, was surrounded. Men and women of all ages, all clad in the same leather vests, stood by their bikes, their faces grim and resolute. They weren't looking for trouble. They had brought it with them. A single figure detached himself from the crowd and walked towards her apartment building. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a graying beard and eyes that held an intensity she recognized from the phone call. He moved with the unshakable confidence of a true leader. He stopped at her door and knocked twice. Her heart hammering against her ribs, Sarah opened it. "Sarah Jenkins?" he asked, his voice the same calm, deep baritone she'd heard before. She could only nod. "I'm Marcus Thorne," he said. "They call me Preacher." He gestured to the army standing silently behind him. "We heard you helped our brother. We're here to return the favor." The dam of her composure finally broke. The fear, the loneliness, the crushing injustice of the past 48 hours overwhelmed her. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob, not from sadness, but from a profound, earth-shattering sense of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. The cavalry had arrived. After giving her a moment to compose herself, Preacher laid out the plan with quiet efficiency. "First things first," he said. "We need to see Pops." Briasha, flanked by Preacher and two other imposing but surprisingly gentle bikers, walked the few blocks back to Main Street. The townspeople stared, their mouths agape at the silent army of leather-clad guardians that had descended upon their quiet town. They found Pops on his bench, looking lost and afraid. When he saw Preacher, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Marcus?" he whispered, as if seeing a ghost. "It's me, Pops," Preacher said, his voice thick with emotion. He knelt before the old man, taking his frail hand in his own. "We're here. We're all here." The reunion was powerful and raw. Decades of pain and regret washed away in a single moment of reconnection. One by one, other bikers came forward, men who remembered Pops as a legend, treating him with a reverence that visibly mended the fractures in the old man's spirit. In full view of the town that had ignored him, the Iron Saviors restored his dignity. Then, Preacher turned his attention to the diner. He walked in, followed by Sarah. Her former boss, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, turned pale. "We'd like to buy everything you've got," Preacher said calmly. "Every sandwich, every slice of pie, every cup of coffee." Confused, Henderson stammered out a total. Preacher paid in cash, then had his men distribute the food to every homeless person they could find in Havenwood. A quiet, pointed act of charity that shamed the diner's management more than any threat could. Next on the agenda was the Havenwood Police Department. Preacher, Sarah, and a silver-haired biker named Silas, who, it turned out, was the corporate lawyer from Seattle, walked into the station. Officer Miller was at the front desk. His smug demeanor from the day before was still firmly in place. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyeing their vests with open contempt. "We're here to follow up on case number 734B, Silas said, his voice calm and professional. "The assault on Ms. Jenkins and Mr. Elias Vance." Miller scoffed. "Like I told her, it's a complicated situation. We're looking into it." "That won't be necessary," Silas said, placing a pristine leather briefcase on the counter. "Because we've done the work for you, we have a signed, notarized affidavit from Ms. Jenkins. We have multiple other witnesses who you failed to interview. We have the unedited video of the assault. And we are prepared to file a formal complaint against you, Officer Miller, for gross dereliction of duty, as well as a multi-million-dollar civil suit against this department for failing to protect our client and for your officer's blatant attempt to intimidate a victim." Miller's face lost all its color. He looked from the lawyer's cold, confident eyes to Preacher's stony silence, and then out the window at the sea of bikers waiting patiently. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear. "I'll get the chief," he stammered, and fled into a back office. The final stop was City Hall. Word had reached them that Chad, Kyle, and Brad, feeling untouchable, were in a meeting with Mayor Thompson discussing a potential real estate investment that would gentrify a portion of the historic downtown. Preacher didn't bother knocking. He, Sarah, and a dozen of his largest men walked straight into the mayor's opulent office. The three tech bros were there, laughing with the mayor. They froze when the bikers entered, their smug smiles dissolving into confusion and then alarm. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with a politician's slicked-back hair, immediately stood up. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private meeting." "We're concerned citizens," Preacher said, his voice dangerously low. He ignored the mayor and fixed his gaze on Chad. "You put your hands on a woman. You put your hands on a veteran. You did it in a town that decided to look the other way." Chad, trying to regain his composure, puffed out his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about. We were attacked." "Shut up, Chad," Kyle hissed, sensing the shift in power. Preacher took a step forward. He didn't threaten them, didn't raise his voice. He simply let the weight of his presence and the presence of the 299 bikers outside fill the room. "Mayor," Preacher said, turning his cold gaze on the politician, "your town has a choice to make today. It can be known as a place where bullies who prey on the weak are protected, or it can be a place that stands for something." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "We'll be staying for a while, patronizing your local businesses. All 300 of us. We'll be here until we see these three in handcuffs. The choice is yours. Justice or a long and very public economic downturn." The threat was clear, precise, and devastating. The mayor looked from the terrified faces of his would-be investors to the unyielding resolve in Preacher's eyes. He saw his town's pristine image, his political future, and his tax base all hanging in the balance. He wilted. He picked up his phone and dialed the police chief. "Jim," he said, and his voice strained. "Yes, it's about that incident at the diner yesterday. I think we need to reconsider our position. Make the arrest now." The look of utter public humiliation on the faces of Chad, Kyle, and Brad as two uniformed officers, their expressions grim, entered the office to lead them away was the catharsis Sarah had desperately needed. It was the sound of the system, finally, bending to the will of the just. That evening, the park in the center of Havenwood was transformed. The intimidating army of bikers had become the hosts of a massive community barbecue. Grills were fired up, music played from a portable speaker, and the Iron Saviors, who had seemed so menacing just hours before, were now laughing and sharing food with the very townspeople who had stared at them in fear. They had made their point. Now they were building a bridge. Sarah was the guest of honor. She sat at a picnic table between Preacher and Pops, a plate of food in front of her that she was too happy to eat. For the first time in years, she felt a profound sense of safety, of belonging. She was no longer Sarah the struggling waitress, but Sarah, the woman who had stood her ground, the friend of the Iron Saviors. People from town came up to her, apologizing for their judgment, shaking her hand, thanking her for her courage. The change in Pops was the most remarkable transformation of all. Dressed in a brand new, crisp Iron Saviors vest gifted to him by Preacher, He looked 10 years younger. The haunted, far-off look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a sparkle of life. He was surrounded by his brothers, men who hung on his every word, clapping him on the back and listening to stories of the old days. His dignity, stolen by poverty and indifference, had been returned to him tenfold. Preacher had already made arrangements for him to get permanent housing near the club's main chapter, and, through their network, had fast-tracked his access to the VA medical care he had long been denied. More miraculously, they had found his daughter. She was living just 2 states away, and a tearful phone call had already laid the groundwork for a reunion. Meanwhile, Sarah's story, the real story, had exploded online. The bikers were social media savvy. They had documented their ride, their confrontations, and the arrests. A GoFundMe page set up by Silas the lawyer with the title "Reward the Courage of Sarah Jenkins" had gone viral. It had raised over $50,000 in less than 6 hours, a tidal wave of support from strangers around the world who were moved by her bravery and the bikers' loyalty. Mr. Henderson from the diner had called, offering her job back with a raise. She politely declined. The eviction notice was a forgotten relic. The money meant she could find a new place, a better place. But more than that, the experience had given her something priceless, a renewed sense of her own worth. The next morning, the bikers prepared to leave. They gathered one last time in front of Sarah's building. Preacher presented her with a gift, a custom-made leather vest just like theirs, but without the club patches. On the back, in beautiful silver script, were the words, "An Iron Savior's Friend." "You've got 300 brothers and sisters now, Sarah," Preacher said, his voice filled with genuine affection. "You ever need anything at all, you call us." Pops, who was riding out with them, gave her a long, powerful hug. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved me, Sarah." "We saved each other," she replied, tears in her eyes. She stood on her small porch, which no longer felt like the entrance to a prison, but the launching pad for a new life. She watched as the legion of bikers started their engines, the roar of justice and brotherhood once again filling the air. They rode out of Havenwood, not as an invading army, but as a departing honor guard. The thunder of their engines faded into the distance, leaving behind a profound silence. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a quiet filled with peace, with possibility, and with the unshakable knowledge that a single, small act of courage could, in fact, move mountains, or, in this case, a thundering legion of bikers.